Hi, I'm Gaviola. Welcome to the Peak on Global, where we break down what's trending in the business world and what you need to know to stay ahead of the curve. Joining me now is Chang from the Peak podcast. Welcome, Brett.
Hey, Ann, great to be with you.
Now, 'tis the season for box office blockbusters. One of the most buzzed about is the sequel to Avatar. I'm going to ask you in a bit, Brett, if you're going to see this at the IMAX. But what I want to know is, if this is successful, could that resurrect theater going, especially in those high-margin IMAX movies?
It's very exciting, Ann. It's been a decade in the making.
Has it been a decade?
If you remember back to when Avatar first came out, it was a huge box office hit, and it was transformational for the movie industry. I remember seeing it in 3D, and it changed the way that I saw movies there on out. And I think this will have a similar effect. There's going to be a lot of hype around it. I think it's perfect timing. Obviously, people are off for the holidays, and so they'll be going to see movies right now. So hopefully it will give a boost to box offices and to theaters across the country. Now, is it enough to push against the tide of streaming? Why, I don't think it's going to do that much, but I think it is an exciting moment in the movie industry.
Isn't it possible, though, that with all things pandemic, what we've done is increase people's interest in both, in streaming and going to see movies in theater, whether it's IMAX or just a regular cinema?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the neat thing about things like Avatar and IMAX movies is that you just can't get that experience anywhere else. You can't replicate that at home. So it's pretty unique in that way. I think what's also worth considering here is that if we are going into a recession, if economic times are getting worse, then people are looking for an escape. And that's what theaters offer. If you go back to the 2008 Great Financial Crisis, you would have seen a similar phenomena where theaters actually did very well during that time because people were looking for something to distract themselves. So theaters, streaming services, those might all actually get a boost as well, even if times get tough.
Absolutely, and going to the movies has become much more expensive, but it is less expensive than, say, flying out somewhere for a vacation. Really good points, Brett. Switching to topic number two, you and I are going to talk about FTX again. So this week, Sam Bankman-Fried was arrested in the Bahamas following criminal charges which were filed by the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District of New York. What's interesting is that this happened hours after he was on Twitter Spaces saying he didn't think he'd be arrested. I personally am wondering why it took so long to arrest him. I'm not asking you that, Brett. I'm asking the universe, but I'd love to get your thoughts on this whole thing.
Yeah, look, I'm no lawyer, but I've read up on this, and my biggest takeaway is that financial crimes actually are very difficult to prosecute, and they take a lot of time to actually pursue those charges. The investigators, and in this case, the Southern District, they have to go really deep into the books, do a forensic audit of what happened, where the money went, and that just takes time to gather all that different information together. If you look at the case of Bernie Madoff, which is the one case that's most recently cited in relative to this one, Bernie Madoff essentially admitted that he did it all. He told his kids, and then his kids reported him to the authorities, and then he was arrested soon after. And so that was a pretty clear-cut case. In a case where there's not that same type of smoking gun, it can take a bit longer. Now, the fact that this happened so quickly actually then now leads me to believe that there is a certain smoking gun where they believe that they were able to quickly gather enough information to take those charges to court and actually see them through.
Yeah, I think this is a case where there are going to be multiple smoking guns. It's just a matter of, do the authorities have the wherewithal to track them down and do what needs to be done with this information? Now, Bankman-Fried's arrest kiboshed his scheduled appearance before U.S. Congress, but we did hear from others, including FTX's new CEO and reality TV star Kevin O'Leary. Full disclosure, I worked as O'Leary's senior producer for years at the CBC. Now, O'Leary, one of the things he did is he pointed the finger at Binance in his testimony. I wonder if we'll truly get to the bottom of what happened, or if we'll have to wait for the Netflix documentary to service up the Hollywood version of what happened here.
Well, I think what really happened is he likely committed a crime. And when you commit a crime, usually they all kind of collapse in on you eventually. And that appears to be what happens. That's definitely what the Southern District believes and the Department of Justice believes. And so we'll see as the court case unfolds what actually happens, and hopefully get a good idea of what the sequence of events was that led to this wild collapse. But it's looking a lot like there was some type of criminal activity within FTX.
That's right. And it is interesting. It depends on who you talk to as to whether or not they believe that CZ, that's the nickname for the head of Binance, is kind of a hero or the ultimate kind of criminal in this particular scenario. Another note that I want to touch on here, Brett, is as a C4 certified Bitcoin professional, which just means that I study the computer science that makes Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies possible, I was dismayed by the number of celebrities who were testifying. And I get it, at least O'Leary is a businessman and he has some skin in the game. But actor Ben McKenzie, who you might know from TV shows including The OC and Gotham, was among those testifying. Apparently he has an undergrad degree in economics. My question is, why him? Bring in an actual fintech expert. Bring in forensic accounting specialists for all of this.
Well, I think you should hear from an array of different voices. I think if you actually look at the education background of Ben McKenzie, it's probably not too different from Kevin O'Leary's. And so, look, I think both of them, it's questionable why either of them were testifying at that point. I think you're absolutely right that they should have forensic experts that can go in and actually work backwards on what happened and the consequences that had for the American people. In Ben McKenzie's case, to give him some credit, he's been working on the crypto file for the past few years now, and he's been really deep into it and debunking, I think, a lot of the myths that the crypto industry was promoting. And so he does have some experience in it, but I think you're absolutely right, and that I don't think, in my opinion, Kevin O'Leary or Ben McKenzie probably should have been testifying. I think probably what we should have heard from is SBF himself, which obviously didn't happen, but anybody else who was involved in some way. Where's CZ on this? There's a number of different people that could have been brought to the committee.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll put a pin on it for now. Third topic here. The president of Shopify reflected on the year that was and the challenges it presented to the company as it struggled to readjust to what many are calling the new normal. This is something we've seen with a bunch of big names in tech, including Meta, where these companies made the mistake of assuming that the way things were at the height of the pandemic is how they would stay for far longer than they actually did. I think, if anything, the events of 2020 and beyond taught business leaders, or should have taught them, that flexibility, the ability to pivot, is so important because, frankly, no one knows what the future holds. In some ways, it's about planning for a multitude of outcomes versus one set course. Isn't this the new reality?
That's absolutely true, and that is the prudent thing to do, correct. But the markets were not incentivizing that type of behavior. If you look back to 2 years ago, if you were a company that was pulling back on your spend, there would be big questions from investors as to why you're doing that when times are so good and you should really be investing and spending all excess cash you have on growth. And that's what they were incentivized to do. Now, if a CEO didn't do that, a publicly traded company, they likely would have had a shareholder revolt and been kicked out of their position. So it's really tough for somebody like a Toby or a Mark Zuckerberg, who has been encouraged to grow and spend at all costs, now to pull back. And it looks easy in hindsight to say, hey, let's be more prudent about that and make sure that we have off ramps. But at the time, they were in a really tough situation. They really thought that this was just how things were going to be, and they spent and invested accordingly. So it's a tough situation for them to be in. But I do think that there is a lesson here that everybody should reevaluate their business and say, hey, are we recession proof? Are we in a position where we can get through troubling times? And you're going to see now who did that planning and who, even when times were good and they were encouraged to spend, who still did that responsibly versus who didn't. Sam Bankman-Fried is probably a good example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, hindsight is always 2020. Thank you so much for your time and your insight, as always, Brett.
Thanks, Ann.
And you can get all your daily business news with the Peak Daily podcast. It is available for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts.